In the heart of the Imperium, beneath skies the color of ash and iron, lies the corpse of humanity's first cradle, Terra. The air is thick enough to choke a god, heavy with incense, machine exhaust, and the whispers of a billion prayers rising like smoke toward a throne that no longer answers. From orbit, the planet glows not with the blue of oceans or the green of life, but with the dull red of industry and the gold shimmer of devotion, a sanctified ruin worshipped by those who will never see its surface. Down here, beneath the endless cathedrals of the Adeptus Ministorum and the crawling manufacturer of the Mechanicus, life is not lived. It is endured. Every breath is rationed faith. Every sunrise, a reminder that the Emperor's light burns only because slaves keep the fires alive. No one here remembers stars. No one remembers freedom. Only the endless drone of hymns and the echo of footsteps on Ferrocrete, marching toward eternity beneath the shadow of the golden throne. The ash never settles on Terra. It drifts in the wind like unending snowfall, carried from the furnaces of devotion that never cease to burn. Every rooftop, every tattered robe, every breath drawn by the faithful bears its taste, dry, metallic, faintly sweet, with the rot of incense and the char of old stone. They say the ash is sacred, that it carries the memory of saints cremated centuries ago, their dust scattered to mingle with the bones of the planet itself. But to those who live beneath its fall, it is simply the air they breathe, and the slow poison that fills their lungs from birth to death. In the lower districts, where light rarely penetrates, and the sky is little more than a rumor, the people move like shadows through a maze of broken arches and dripping pipes. Steam coils from cracked vents, hissing with the stench of promethium, and in the distance the bells of a distant basilica toll, the beginning of another work cycle. The sound is not one of hope or ceremony, but a reminder, another day survived, another day offered to the throne. Children learn to bow to the sound before they can speak. They do not know why, only that failing to do so brings punishment swifter than hunger. Loran was one of them, just another thin figure among billions, his face half hidden beneath a strip of cloth, meant to keep the soot from his mouth. He worked the manufactoria lines, where servitors stood motionless beside their machines, their flesh long since fused to metal. The clang of the forges was the rhythm of his life. Each strike of the automated hammers sent shudders through the floor, rattling the teeth in his jaw and the faith in his heart. Above him, vast statues loomed, saints with eyes gouged hollow by time, arms outstretched to nothing. Beneath those hollow gazes, Loran tightened bolts, checked seals, whispered the mandated prayers to keep the machines from stalling. The overseer's voice came through the vox grill in bursts of static, each word a sermon and a threat. When the shift ended, there was no rest. The workers moved together like a single organism, trudging down the blackened corridors toward the ration stations. Lines stretched into the darkness, men and women clutching tin cups like relics, murmuring the litany of gratitude as they waited for the thick nutrient slurry that would keep them alive another day. Somewhere behind the queue, a hymn began, low, trembling, almost lost beneath the mechanical roar. Others joined in, their voices wavering, broken by coughs. It was not beautiful, but it was human, and in that rare flicker of unity there was something almost defiant, a quiet, stubborn echo of what mankind once was. High above, the sky remained hidden behind layers of smog and machinery. Only the faint red shimmer of distant forges marked the horizon, a mockery of dawn. Pilgrims still came to these lower levels, wrapped in rags, crawling on their knees through corridors of filth and faith alike. They carried candles that guttered in the ashfall, praying for the Emperor to notice them, to forgive their insignificance. Some swore they had heard his voice in their dreams. Others claimed to have seen lights, ghostly figures walking among the smog, and spoke of it with such conviction that even the most hardened worker dared not mock them. On Terra, faith was not optional, it was survival. The belief that the Emperor still watched, still cared, was the only warmth that remained. But there were moments, rare and dangerous, when even faith wavered. Once, when the power grids failed and the manufactoria went dark for 7 hours, Loran saw something he would never forget. Without the endless glow of the furnaces, the city became silent. The people gathered in confusion, listening to the emptiness where the machines should have been. And in that silence, he heard it, a deep, slow pulse that seemed to come from beneath the ground. Like the heartbeat of the world itself, heavy and ancient, some fell to their knees, believing it to be the Emperor's sign. Others wept, terrified that the throne had gone still. For Loran it was neither, it was only the sound of a dying world still pretending to live. When the power returned, so did the noise, the heat, the endless motion. The moment passed, buried beneath labor and prayer, but it lingered in the corners of his mind, like smoke trapped under glass. Terra was alive, but not in the way the ecclesiarchy claimed. It breathed through its people, through its fires, through its suffering, and somewhere beneath it all, something vast and unseen stirred. Sleep came to Loran rarely, and without comfort. The dormitory was a vault of rust and whispers, where the light never dimmed, and the air never moved. The walls sweated condensation that pooled on the metal floors, and the smell of oil and unwashed bodies was so constant that it ceased to be noticed. He lay on his back among hundreds of others, listening to the quiet rattle of breath, the distant rumble of machinery above, and the rhythmic chant of the night overseers pacing the corridors. Their voices were mechanical, fed through vox amplifiers, reciting endless catechisms to keep the minds of the faithful anchored to duty. Work is worship. Worship is life. Life is the Emperor's flame. The words crawled through his half-sleep like static, latching onto his dreams until they became indistinguishable from thought itself. Sometimes he dreamed of the sky, not the ashen veil that smothered Terra now, but a sky as he imagined it might once have been, open, vast blue beyond comprehension. It was a forbidden fantasy, born from scraps of half-remembered hymns that spoke of oceans and light. In his dream, he would stand at the edge of a great expanse, breathing air so clean it hurt his chest. But even there, in that impossible calm, the shadow of the Emperor's palace loomed, a silhouette of gold and agony stretching across the horizon. And when he woke, he would find his cheeks wet with sweat and his hands trembling, as if even in sleep he had tried to reach for something beyond his station. The next morning began, as all others did, with the toll of the sub-hive bell and the sudden glare of lumen strips flaring to life. Loran rose with the others, pulled his ragged cloak tight around his shoulders, and joined the line moving toward the manufactorum. Along the way, a group of penitents passed by, half-naked, their skin carved with scripture, dragging chains that rang like faint music on the metal floor. The crowd parted in silence, eyes lowered. A servo priest followed behind them, swinging a censer that spilled fragrant smoke, his face hidden beneath layers of gilded circuitry. "Praise the throne," he intoned. "Endure, for he endures with you." The penitents' blood dripped freely, marking their passage with crimson trails that steamed in the cold air. At the entrance to the manufactorum, the gates opened with a shuddering roar. Inside, the sound was absolute, the roar of presses, the shriek of steel, the thump of mechanical hearts. Sparks rained from above like dying stars, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and ozone. Loran took his position along the assembly line, his hands moving by memory more than thought. Each piece he fitted, each lever he tightened, was part of a machine whose purpose he did not know. He only knew that it was for the Imperium, and that ignorance was safety. Questions were a luxury reserved for the highborn, or for those too foolish to live long. Beside him worked a woman named Mereka, her eyes dulled by years of exhaustion. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had already accepted her death. "They say the palace consumes 1,000 souls a day," she murmured once, without looking at him. "To keep the Emperor alive. To keep the light burning." Loran had heard the same rumors whispered before, but hearing it spoken aloud, here in the endless heat and noise, made it feel heavier, truer. "Maybe it's not souls," he replied quietly. "Maybe it's just power. Machines breaking down, circuits dying." She smiled faintly, a sad, humorless thing. "Everything breaks down, Loran. Even faith." The overseer's whip cracked across the line, ending the conversation. Pain was not the worst punishment. Attention was. Those who drew the eye of the overseers often disappeared by the next shift, taken for reassignment. No one ever asked where they went. Some said they were sent to the surface to clean the outer hives, where radiation storms howled. Others believed they were offered to the Golden Throne itself, their bodies burned to feed its failing might. Whatever the truth, the message was clear: silence preserved life. That night, after the final bell, Loran lingered near one of the broken ventilation shafts, overlooking the lower chasms of the city. From there he could see the faint gleam of the Promethean rivers flowing through the cracks, molten, alive, and endless. For a moment, he imagined the surface world, the spires and cathedrals reaching toward the heavens, the custodes standing vigil in armor of gold. It was said that their eyes could see through lies, that they had walked beside the Emperor himself when Terra was still young. To the people below, they were more myth than flesh, figures of perfection that could never understand the crawling lives of the billions beneath them. And yet, in some distant part of his heart, Loran envied them, not for their power, but for their certainty. A faint tremor rippled through the metal beneath his feet, subtle but unmistakable. He froze, listening. It was not the usual rhythm of machinery, nor the familiar hum of the city's understructure. This was deeper, slower, like the echo of something vast shifting in the dark. The same sound he had heard once before, when the forges fell silent. It came again, and for an instant he felt it vibrate through his bones, as if the world itself was murmuring a secret he could not understand. He wanted to call out, to ask if anyone else had felt it, but the words died in his throat. The moment passed, swallowed by the roar of engines and the hiss of steam. Only the ash continued to fall, steady and eternal. He turned away from the vent and whispered a prayer, not to the Emperor, but to the idea of him, to something vast and distant that might still listen, even from behind the suffocating veil of machinery and faith. The prayer had no words, only longing. And in that quiet space between sound and thought, Loran began to sense that his small, forgotten life was part of something far older and more terrible than he had ever dared to imagine. The following week, the ash storm came. It began without warning, sweeping through the lower hives like a living tide. The manufactoria sealed their upper gates as the alarms wailed, and those too slow to reach shelter vanished into the suffocating grey. Through the thick glass of the assembly hall, Loran could see shapes moving in the storm, silhouettes of people stumbling, their outlines dissolving into dust. The overseers ordered the lines to continue. Work could not stop, not even for the weather. The Emperor endures, they said through the vox, and so shall you. The ash pressed against the walls with the force of a rising sea. It found its way into every crack, coating the machinery, dimming the lumen lamps, until the world was painted in shades of smoke. Each breath burned the lungs, leaving the taste of iron and incense. Loran worked until his hands went numb, until the rhythmic motion of the machines became indistinguishable from his heartbeat. Hours passed like days, the sound of the storm merging with the endless hum of production. When the final bell tolled, it was almost a shock, a reminder that time still existed beyond labor. Outside, the storm had eased, leaving a world transformed. The streets were buried in drifts of grey powder, soft as snow and just as deceptive. The outlines of bodies could be seen beneath it, pilgrims, workers, servitors frozen mid-motion. The living moved among them like ghosts, brushing the ash from the dead without ceremony. Death was not tragedy here. It was simply another function of life. The bodies would be collected, burned, and returned to the cycle. Even the dead served. Loran joined the procession toward the dormitories, his boots sinking into the ash with a muffled crunch. He passed a child sitting alone beside a collapsed shrine, tracing symbols into the dust with her finger. "The Emperor sees you," she whispered to herself over and over, as though saying it would make it true. Behind her, the shrine's candles still burned, tiny pinpricks of light against the endless grey. For a moment he hesitated, wanting to say something, to offer comfort or help, but the words would not come. Compassion was a luxury for another world, another time. He turned away, and the sound of her whisper followed him until it faded into the hum of the hives. That night, the dormitory was silent. No overseers patrolled. No hymns echoed from the vox grills. The storm had drained the city's power grids, and in the dark the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Loran lay awake, staring into the faint red glow of the emergency lamps, listening for that deep pulse he had heard before. It came faintly at first, a tremor in the metal beneath him. Then stronger, a steady rhythm, like a heart laboring beneath the skin of the world. He pressed his hand to the wall, feeling the vibration move through his palm. He wasn't alone. Across the rows of bunks, others stirred, their faces pale in the dim light. No one spoke, but the awareness spread, a silent recognition that something beneath them was alive. The sound grew until the air itself seemed to quiver. A few began to pray, their voices trembling, half in fear, half in awe. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pulse ceased. The silence that followed was deeper than before, thick enough to feel. In the days that followed, rumors spread like infection. Some claimed that the Emperor's heart had faltered, that the Astronomicon had flickered, and the throne had nearly gone dark. Others swore it was a sign of renewal, that he had stirred, that his divine gaze had swept across the world once more. The priests denied both. The throne is eternal, they said, unchanging, unbroken. But even they spoke faster than usual, their chants more frantic, as if to drown out their own uncertainty. Loran tried to forget it, to lose himself in the rhythm of work again, but the memory would not fade. Every sound reminded him of that pulse, the thud of the hammers, the hiss of the furnaces, even the beat of his own heart. He began to wonder if the city itself was part of some greater organism, if the people were its blood, its movement, its breath, and if that were true, then perhaps the Emperor was not only its ruler, but its flesh. Perhaps the two had become one, a world built from devotion and bone. On the 7th day after the storm, a procession of pilgrims passed through the Manufactoria district, bound for the upper levels. They carried banners woven with golden thread, depicting the Emperor seated upon his throne, radiant and eternal. Loran stood among the watching crowd as the pilgrims chanted and burned incense that smelled of sweet decay. For a moment he imagined that their voices reached the heavens, that their faith pierced the smog and the endless machinery to touch something real. But when he looked up, the sky was still hidden, a ceiling of smoke and flame. The stars were gone. He felt something shift within him then, not rebellion, not disbelief, but a quiet recognition that perhaps the Emperor did see them, and perhaps that was the tragedy, that he saw and could not act, bound to the throne by the weight of a dying empire. And the people below, the billions who bled and prayed and endured, were not forgotten, only necessary. The ash began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the pilgrims, the statues, the banners, until even gold looked grey. Loran closed his eyes and let it settle on his skin. It was heavy, it was holy, and beneath it all Terra breathed. The veins of Terra do not carry blood, but fire. They run beneath the crust of the holy world like arteries of molten light, channeled through colossal conduits that pulse with the heat of a billion machines. Deep below the spires and cathedrals, beyond the reach of sunlight or storm, the planet's core thrums with an energy so vast it seems alive, an ancient heart that has never stopped beating, even as the flesh around it decays. It was here, in the sub-foundries and heat tunnels beneath the manufactoria, that Loran now worked. After the ash storm, entire sectors had been deemed compromised. Thousands were reassigned, sent below ground to repair damage to the Prometheum lines. It was not punishment, nor reward, simply another function of survival. The workers descended through elevators that shook with every meter, their faces lit by the dim red glow of warning lamps. As the doors sealed behind them, the sound of the surface vanished, replaced by a low, endless hum. The air down here was thick and hot, tasting of oil and iron. The walls dripped condensation that hissed when it touched the heated pipes. Great machines rose from the darkness, turbines the size of temples, their blades spinning in slow, heavy rhythm. Servitors shuffled along narrow walkways, their bodies fused with the metal, their eyes replaced by lenses that pulsed faintly with light. Some were ancient beyond reckoning, their flesh desiccated, their servos whining with each motion. Each one whispered the same fragmented prayer as it worked, for the throne, for the machine, for the light. Loran's team was assigned to Tunnel 19 Gamma, where the heat was so intense that even through their protective robes, the air burned their skin. They worked in pairs, sealing ruptured conduits and clearing debris. Every movement was watched by a Magos overseeing the repairs from a raised platform, his body more machine than man. His voice echoed through the Vox speakers, modulated and cold. Efficiency is devotion. Error is heresy. The phrase repeated every few minutes, as steady as the pulse of the turbines. Hours blurred together in the heat. The workers barely spoke, conserving breath. The constant vibration made it hard to think. It seeped into the bones, into the mind, until Loran could almost believe the sound was coming from within him. Once, while tightening a valve, he caught his reflection in a polished metal panel. His face looked older, not by years, but by weight. The eyes that stared back seemed hollow, drained by something more than exhaustion. He turned away quickly, afraid of what he might recognize there. During one of the rare rest intervals, the workers gathered in a chamber lit by the dim glow of coolant vents. They sat in silence, sipping recycled water that smelled faintly of rust. Merica was there too, her hair matted with sweat, her skin blistered from the heat. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that the Emperor feels this? The heat, the exhaustion, all of it?" Loran hesitated. "He's beyond pain." "Is he?" Her eyes lifted toward the ceiling, though there was nothing above them but rock and fire. "If he is bound to the throne, If his spirit is tied to this world, maybe he feels everything, every burn, every scream. Maybe that's what keeps him alive. The thought lingered long after she stopped speaking. It was dangerous, almost heretical, yet there was something about it that felt right. The Emperor is the sum of all human suffering, sustained by it, defined by it. Perhaps it was not just faith that held the Imperium together, but agony, the collective endurance of billions channeling their pain into worship. Loran wondered if that was why the world seemed to breathe, why the tunnels pulsed like veins. Later, while working near a cracked conduit, he caught sight of something strange. A faint light flickered deep within the pipe, not the usual red glow of molten promethium, but a cold bluish shimmer. It moved like a living thing, twisting and fading when he tried to focus on it. He called for Merica, but when she looked, it was gone. The Magos dismissed his report as heat delirium, but Loran couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen something real, something alive beneath the machinery. That night, in the sleeping chambers carved directly into the rock, he dreamed again of the pulse, but this time it was louder, faster, as if something immense was stirring beneath him. He saw flashes, fire spilling through metal veins, cities collapsing into themselves, and above it all, a figure of light bound in chains of gold, reaching toward him. When he woke, his hands were clenched so tightly that his nails had drawn blood. He wiped the sweat from his face and sat up, breathing hard. The air was hot and still, the walls humming softly. Across from him, Merica was awake too, staring at the floor with a strange expression. "Did you feel it?" she whispered. "In your dreams?" He didn't answer, but she smiled faintly, as if she already knew. Outside, the turbines kept turning, and the veins of Terra burned on. The next day began as all others did, with the blare of sirens and the pounding rhythm of iron boots on metal floors. Workers were herded into the tunnels under the watchful gaze of Skitari overseers, their red optics cutting through the haze like cold fire. The smell of burnt oil was stronger today, sharper, as though the world itself was exhaling smoke. Loren could feel it in his lungs. Each breath tasted of metal, of age, of something ancient rotting deep below. The Mago's voice echoed again through the vox, monotone and absolute. "The flame is eternal. The machine endures. You are extensions of his will." The workers repeated the words automatically, their voices dull, their faith worn thin by repetition. Even belief, down here, corroded like the metal around them. But beneath the noise, Loren began to notice something else, a rhythm that didn't belong. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a tremor underfoot that didn't match the heartbeat of the turbines. It came in irregular pulses, like the breathing of a colossal creature asleep beneath the earth. Each time it surged, the lights dimmed slightly, then returned to full strength. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they noticed but pretended not to. On Terra, disbelief was more dangerous than ignorance. When their shift ended, Loren approached the coolant vents again. The same blue shimmer flickered along the pipes, just for a moment, enough to make the air feel colder. This time, Merica saw it too. She froze, her face pale in the dim light. "It's not heat," she whispered. "It's something else." The Magos was near, conferring with a pair of servitors. Loren felt an impulse to report it, but something in Merica's expression stopped him. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but wonder. "Don't," she murmured. "They'll purge the section. They'll call it contamination." So they said nothing. But that night, when the others slept, they returned to the tunnel alone. The air was almost unbearably hot, yet the strange light shimmered cool and steady beneath the metal surface. Loren reached out, his gloved hand trembling as he brushed the conduit. The metal vibrated beneath his touch, not mechanical, but alive, pulsing like a vein, and for a heartbeat. He felt something impossible. It was a whisper, not through his ears, but through his skin, his blood. Words without sound, shapes of thought that pressed against his mind like a prayer being spoken backwards. He pulled away with a gasp. The light vanished instantly. "What did you hear?" Merica asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. I don't know." But even as he said it, the echo of that silent voice lingered, vast, sorrowful, and immeasurably old. The following days were a blur of exhaustion and unease. More workers began to collapse from the heat, their bodies unable to keep pace with the labor. The servitors dragged the corpses away without pause, leaving streaks of blackened fluid across the walkways. The magos said nothing. To him, flesh was a resource, replaceable, but the strange rhythm continued, stronger now. Sometimes, when the lights flickered, Loren swore he could see outlines in the steam, faint silhouettes of figures moving where no one stood. He caught glimpses of wings made of fire, of hands reaching through walls of molten light. Always gone when he blinked, always half real. At one point, a tremor shook the entire tunnel system. Pipes burst, spraying jets of scalding vapor. The alarm screamed, and the mago's voice cracked through the static. "Containment breach in Section 9. Seal all conduits." Workers scrambled through the smoke, coughing and shouting. Loren and Merica ran toward the breach, their robes scorched and wet. Through the haze, they saw it, a fissure glowing with blue light, cutting straight through the floor like a wound in the world. The magos descended, his servo limbs hissing. "Do not approach. Seal it." But Loren couldn't move. The light poured from the fissure in waves, painting the walls with shifting patterns that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. He heard the whisper again, stronger now, almost a voice. Not words, but meaning. A feeling of hunger and memory. A call. The magos extended a mechadendrite toward the fissure, instruments clicking. Then, without warning, the blue light flared, blinding, silent, all-consuming. The magos convulsed, his vox grill screaming static. Sparks burst from his augmentations. Servitors collapsed, twitching violently. The smell of ozone and burnt flesh filled the tunnel. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The fissure sealed itself, leaving only the scorched mark of its presence. The magos was dead, his metal frame smoking. Silence fell, heavy, total. Merica stared at Loren, her voice trembling. That wasn't the machine. That was something else. Loren couldn't answer. He looked at the burned mark on the floor and saw, for the briefest moment, the faint outline of an aquila, 2 wings spread wide, fading into darkness. They said nothing more that night. But as they lay in the heat and the silence, both felt it, the pulse beneath the stone, the slow, steady rhythm of something vast awakening. And somewhere deep beneath them, beyond the reach of any machine, the planet's heart began to beat louder. The following days felt stretched thin, like a thread about to snap. The manufactorum's routines continued, shift whistles, hymn recitations, the scraping of iron against iron, but something had changed beneath the surface. The tremors came more often now, sometimes gentle enough to be mistaken for distant thunder, sometimes violent enough to rattle the oil lamps hanging from the vaulted ceiling. And each time the faint blue shimmer flickered through the cracks in the ferrocrete, a ghostly pulse that no one dared mention aloud. Rumors began to spread despite the risk. Whispers in the work lines, coded prayers between breaths. Some said the machine god was speaking directly to the faithful, awakening through the bones of Terra. Others muttered that it was a sign of the emperor himself, stirring within his throne at last. The priests called such talk heresy, but their sermons grew louder and more frantic. Faith and fear always shared the same heartbeat. Loren felt both. He went through the motions of his duties, but his mind was caught on the memory of that light, that whisper. At night, when he closed his eyes, he saw visions, titanic shapes wreathed in fire, oceans of metal flowing like blood, and a single, endless voice murmuring from somewhere beyond reason. It wasn't speech, it was presence, a consciousness so vast it felt like standing beneath an ocean and feeling the weight of it press against your chest. Merica, too, had changed. She spoke less, worked faster, and kept her eyes fixed on the conduits. One night, as they returned from their shift, she stopped him at the threshold of their hab. "It's calling to us," she said. "Can't you feel it, like it knows we touched it?" He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was imagining things, but deep inside he couldn't. Because he did feel it, everywhere. In the floor beneath his boots, in the distant echo of the cathedral bells above, even in his dreams, where he sometimes saw the emperor's visage flickering between light and shadow, eyes closed as if still waiting to awaken. Then came the purge. Without warning, a detachment of the adeptus arbites stormed their sector, black armor glinting under the dim lumen strips, mauls and shotguns raised. Behind them came robed tech priests from a higher order, their servo limbs hissing, their incense burners swinging. The vox crackled with the declaration: "By decree of the Fabricator General, Section 47B is under containment. All personnel are to be processed for contamination." Workers froze in terror. The faintest hint of resistance was met with brutality, batons cracking bone, gunfire echoing through the tunnels. Loren saw Merica pulled from the line, screaming as two servitors dragged her toward the inspection platform. He tried to reach her, but an arbite slammed a maul into his chest, sending him sprawling against the wall. His lungs burned, his vision swam. Through the haze, he saw the tech priest extend a mechadendrite toward Merica's face, scanning her with beams of crimson light. Unstable resonance detected, the machine voice droned. Subject shows exposure to unidentified waveform. Purge recommended. "No," Loren shouted, struggling to rise. "She's not." But the words were cut short by the blast. A burst of blue energy erupted from the scanner, engulfing Merica in blinding light. The arbite staggered back, shouting. For an instant, the entire tunnel was illuminated, walls, pipes, faces, all washed in that impossible glow. And in the heart of it, Merica stood unharmed. The energy coursed over her skin like liquid flame, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly brilliance. She looked at Loren, her voice no longer her own but layered, echoing with something immense. "It remembers," she said. "It remembers what it was." Then the light burst outward in a wave that shattered everything it touched. The arbites vanished in ash. The servitors shorted out, collapsing in twitching heaps. The tech priests screamed binary prayers before being consumed entirely. The tunnel roof cracked, raining dust and molten fragments. When the light finally faded, the world was still. Only Loren remained conscious, lying amid the ruin. Merica was gone. No body, no trace. Only the faint outline of her form scorched into the metal floor. The mark pulsed faintly for a moment, then dimmed into darkness. He crawled forward, gasping, his ears ringing. Around him, silence stretched like a wound. He could feel it again, the pulse, stronger than ever, now moving in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Deep beneath the wreckage, the planet seemed to sigh. Somewhere far above, in the distant heavens, the Astronomicon flickered. Just once, barely enough to notice, but enough that somewhere, aboard a passing vessel, a navigator looked up from his chart and frowned. The pulse continued, slow, steady, alive. The days after the purge blurred together like a fever dream. Laran drifted through the ruins of his sector, half dead and half reborn, carrying with him the echo of that impossible light. The manufactorum was sealed now, its gates welded shut by order of the mechanicus, its interior still smoking from the containment blasts. Patrols swept the streets, collecting survivors and executing witnesses, but somehow he remained unseen. He moved through the shadowed arteries of Terra like a ghost, guided by instinct, or perhaps by something older, something that had begun to awaken within him. He found shelter in a collapsed shrine near the lower hab levels, where the walls were blackened by soot, and the statues of saints lay shattered among the dust. The smell of burnt oil lingered in the air, mixed with the copper tang of blood. There he knelt before the remnants of an icon, a cracked mural of the Emperor's face, its golden paint peeling and faded to rust. For the first time in his life, he didn't know how to pray. His lips moved, but no words came. Only silence, heavy and infinite. At night, when the air recyclers groaned and the distant thunder of orbital cannons rolled through the crust, he could still see her. The moment before she vanished, her eyes filled with light, and the sound of something vast moving just beyond the veil of reality. He tried to convince himself it was the Emperor's mercy that spared him. But deep down, he knew it wasn't mercy. It was purpose. Rumors of the incident spread quickly despite the Arbite's suppression. Some said a daemon had manifested in the manufactorum, devouring an entire shift. Others claimed a fragment of the Omnissiah had descended to purge the impure. The most dangerous whispers, though, came from those who swore they had seen a blue flame rising from the earth itself, a sign that the machine soul of Terra was stirring. The priests called it blasphemy. The mechanicus called it corruption. But among the desperate and the broken, it became something else. Hope. One evening, as he scavenged near the smog vents, Laran encountered a small congregation huddled around a makeshift altar of scrap metal. They were ragged workers, faces hollow with hunger and exhaustion, but their eyes burned with a strange conviction. The preacher leading them wore a tattered robe, his voice hoarse yet commanding. "The throne sleeps," he said, raising a rusted aquila to the dim light. "But the earth remembers. The Emperor's spirit does not sit idle. It flows beneath us, through us. Every spark, every heartbeat, every fragment of machine and man alike. We are his continuation, whether they wish to see it or not." Laran felt something stir inside him. The words sounded mad, heretical even, but they resonated with the pulse in his chest, that same rhythm he had felt beneath the wreckage. When the preacher's eyes met his, the man faltered for a moment, as if recognizing something. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he whispered. Laran didn't answer, but the silence was enough. The preacher nodded slowly, then gestured for him to step closer. The congregation parted as he approached, their gazes filled with reverence and fear. When he reached the altar, the preacher bowed his head. "Then you are proof," he said. "The Emperor still moves within his creation." The air grew heavier, the shadows stretching long. Somewhere deep below, a tremor rippled through the ground, soft but deliberate, like the heartbeat of a buried titan. The congregation gasped, some falling to their knees. Laran felt the pulse align perfectly with his own, and in that moment he understood something terrible and beautiful. Faith was no longer belief. It was contagion. The more they prayed, the stronger the pulse became. The Emperor might not have spoken for 10,000 years, but perhaps the world itself had begun to speak for him. The preacher's flock grew in the days that followed. They gathered at the edges of abandoned tunnels, where light from the surface never reached, whispering prayers that blended the language of the machine god with the hymns of the ecclesiarchy. Their faith no longer asked for salvation. It demanded connection. They believed that through pain, through the grinding machinery and the suffering of billions, the Emperor's essence was diffusing through the world like radiant dust. Loran became their quiet center. He did not lead them, nor did he claim revelation. But when he spoke, they listened. He told them of the light in the manufactorum, of the pulse in the earth, of how even the dead machines had trembled at its touch. His words were slow, uncertain at first, yet the more he remembered, the more his voice carried the weight of conviction. They began to call him Witness, and though the title filled him with dread, he didn't deny it. He had seen something no doctrine could name, and it was still moving beneath his skin. The deeper he descended into the underhive, the more the world itself began to change. Walls sweated with condensation that shimmered faintly blue, as though infused with ghost light. Vox lines crackled with phantom signals, broadcasting half-forgotten hymns in reversed tongues. Even the servitors malfunctioned, their mechanical voices glitching mid-chant to mutter fragments of forgotten catechisms. The tech priests, who ventured down to investigate, either vanished or returned speaking in riddles, their flesh grafts twitching as though haunted by invisible currents. One night, the preacher approached Loran in secret. "You must leave," he urged, voice trembling. "The adeptus arbites have begun purges again. They call it a heresy cult, what we do here. They will burn the tunnels." His eyes glistened in the half-light, fear and faith warring within them. "You are the spark, Witness. If you stay, you die with us. But if you go, maybe the spark spreads." Loran stared at him for a long moment. The words echoed strangely. He no longer feared death. He feared losing the pulse. But as he listened, he realized the preacher was right. The flame had already moved beyond this place. It lived in the eyes of those who prayed, in the hum of the machines, in the blood of the city itself. When dawn came, the purge began. The Arbites descended in black-armored columns, their boots pounding in rhythm with the mechanical heart of Terra. Incendiary rounds lit the darkness with holy fire. The preacher's congregation did not flee. They sang. Voices rose in harmony with the roar of combustion, a requiem to the Emperor and the machine beneath. Loran escaped through the maintenance shafts, his lungs filled with ash, his ears with the sound of burning prayer. When he finally emerged onto a higher platform, he looked back and saw the smoke spiraling upward, not black, but tinged faintly with blue, like the reflection of stars long dead. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard the preacher's voice among the flames, whispering his final benediction. "The throne burns through us all." He wandered for days, crossing the strata between the slums and the upper hive, where light filters through stained glass and the air carries the scent of incense instead of rot. The shift was dizzying. Up here, faith was clean, perfumed, rehearsed. Cathedrals rose like mountains, their spires piercing the smog, their bells tolling over oceans of worshippers. Processions of pilgrims marched in silence, their faces hidden behind masks of gold and porcelain. And yet, Loran sensed the same pulse here, quieter, buried beneath ceremony, but alive all the same. He entered a cathedral once, drawn by the sound of a choir. Thousands of voices rose together, chanting praises in perfect synchronization. But as he listened, the harmony began to fracture. Beneath the melody, he could hear another rhythm, a deep, irregular thrum that matched the one in his chest. It was faint, but constant, like the beat of a colossal engine. The faithful sang of the Emperor enthroned in light, but Loran felt something else in their song. a yearning for the end of the waiting, for the release that never came. When the final note faded, he stood alone beneath the towering statue of the Emperor, its eyes glowing faintly from internal lumens. He whispered to the silent Colossus, "If you live through us, why must we suffer to keep you breathing?" His words vanished into the vaulted ceiling. For a moment, he thought he saw the statue's mouth move, just slightly, as if forming a word he couldn't hear. Then the lights flickered, and the pulse beneath his feet grew stronger. The quake struck without warning. One moment the cathedral stood still as eternity, and the next the entire edifice shuddered, as though the planet itself had drawn breath. Bells crashed from their towers, shattering upon marble floors. Pilgrims screamed, their voices echoing through the collapsing aisles as dust cascaded like divine snow. Loren stumbled to his knees, feeling the pulse in the ground surge into a violent rhythm, an acceleration that sent cracks rippling through the sacred stones. The statue of the Emperor loomed above him, its features distorted in the trembling light, as if the God-King himself was shifting within his effigy. Then, through the thunder of falling masonry, he heard it, not the roar of collapsing architecture, but a voice, low, resonant, unhuman. It was neither sound nor thought, but something in between, vibrating through his bones and his blood. The words were indistinct, half buried beneath layers of static and fire, but he felt their weight all the same. It was the same presence that had filled the manufactorum, the same current that had followed him through the tunnels, the same impossible awareness that now pulsed through the heart of Terra itself. It was calling, not with command, but recognition. When the tremor ceased, silence reclaimed the cathedral. Dust hung in the air like incense. The statue's head had fallen, shattered into fragments that glowed faintly blue in the dim light. Loren rose slowly, his body trembling, not with fear, but with revelation. For the first time, he understood what the preacher had meant. The Emperor was not merely sustained by faith. He was faith, diffused and refracted through the endless suffering of mankind. Every prayer, every death, every whisper in the dark was another heartbeat in the cosmic body of the Imperium. Terra was not his throne, it was his body, his tomb, and his engine all at once. He left the cathedral before the Arbites arrived, slipping once more into the labyrinth of streets. The city above was in chaos. Tremors had rippled through multiple sectors, plasma grids had flickered, Vox channels overflowed with static hymns that no one could trace. Some said the Astronomicon had dimmed for 3 full seconds, a blasphemous impossibility. Others insisted that the Emperor's light had flared brighter than it had in millennia, visible even through the smog of Terra. Whatever the truth, the hive world had changed. Something deep beneath its crust was stirring. Loren wandered toward the surface, following the faint trail of light that bled upward through cracks in the ferrocrete. The air grew thin, but the pulse guided him like a compass. Eventually he reached the edge of the upper hive, where the city met the ashen plains beyond the walls. There he stopped, watching as the horizon trembled with auric haze. For the first time in his life, he saw the faint shimmer of the Astronomicon cutting through the polluted sky, a pillar of blinding radiance stretching upward into the void. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sight. The pulse inside him merged with the rhythm of the beam above. For a moment, everything aligned, the earth, the light, the countless lives of the Imperium beating in unison. He felt himself dissolve into it, his identity stripped away until only awareness remained. He saw the hive cities from orbit, glowing like embers in the dark, the orbiting docks crowded with ships that bore the mark of the Aquila, the endless expanse of the void beyond, where mankind's dominion flickered like a candle in a storm. And through it all, He sensed a truth too vast to contain, that suffering was the Emperor's language, and that Terra spoke it fluently. When he finally opened his eyes, the light had faded. The sky was grey once more, and the wind carried only the whisper of distant machinery. He stood, trembling, unsure whether what he had witnessed was revelation or madness. But somewhere beneath his feet, the pulse continued, steady, eternal, waiting. He turned back toward the city, toward the billions who would never see the light, and he smiled faintly. Faith was no longer something he offered. It was something he carried, like a contagion, like a heartbeat that could not be silenced. And far above, in the shadow of the palace, the Astronomicon flared again, briefly, like the blink of an eye that might once have belonged to a god. The closer one draws to the heart of Terra, the quieter the world becomes, not from peace, but from reverence. The noise of the lower hives, the endless clatter of manufactoria, the dirges of laborers, the drone of traffic and industry, all of it fades, layer by layer, into silence. The air grows colder, thinner, purer. The light shifts from the rusted glow of promethium fires to the pale gold of sanctified lumens. And yet, beneath that holy stillness, the same pulse continues, deeper, stronger, like the breath of something colossal sleeping just beneath the crust. For Loran, the journey upward was like ascending through centuries of civilization. He moved from the rusted foundations of the hive to its crystalline spires, passing through levels of increasing purity and decreasing humanity. Here, servitors outnumbered men. Custodian patrols glided through marble corridors, with their golden armor gleaming like the light of a dying sun. The air was thick with incense and ozone, as if the prayers themselves had been converted into atmosphere. He had followed the pulse for weeks, drawn inexorably toward its source. It had grown more insistent, less like a sound, and more like a presence whispering in the marrow of his bones. He could no longer tell whether it came from beneath his feet or from within his chest. Sleep became impossible. Food lost its taste. The only thing that mattered was movement, forward, upward, closer. At the outermost perimeter of the Imperial Palace, he was stopped for the first time. A wall of light barred his path, not a physical barrier, but a field of radiant energy that shimmered like molten glass. Before it stood a figure clad in auric armor, his face hidden behind a sculpted helm, his halberd resting across his chest. The custodian's voice, when it came, was neither cruel nor kind, but absolute. No further mortal. Loran froze. The pulse surged violently, and for a moment he thought it would tear him apart from the inside. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words came out as a whisper. "I can feel him." The custodian tilted his head slightly. "Many make that claim. Few survive it." His tone held neither mockery nor pity. He studied Loran for a long moment, the faint hum of his armor, the only sound in the vast hall. Then, with something like curiosity, he asked softly, "What is it you seek?" Loran's answer was simple: truth. Silence stretched between them. Then the custodian stepped aside. The wall of light flickered, parting just enough for one man to pass. "Then enter," he said. "But understand, the light does not reveal, it consumes." Beyond the barrier, the air changed entirely. Every breath burned with cold radiance, filling his lungs with the taste of metal and ozone. The corridors here were carved from white marble, veined with gold, each arch etched with script older than memory. The sound of chanting echoed faintly from somewhere deep within, though it was impossible to tell whether it came from living throats or from the walls themselves. Loran followed the sound until he reached a vast chamber, a sanctum of impossible scale. It was filled with machinery that defied comprehension, Towers of cables and adamantium ribs curving upward into infinity, their surfaces glowing with steady golden light. At the center of it all hung a sphere of energy, pulsing rhythmically like a heart. Its light was both blinding and beautiful, and from it radiated the faintest hum, the same frequency that had haunted him since the manufactorum, now magnified 1,000-fold. He fell to his knees. The pulse that had lived inside him for so long was here, naked and terrible. This was the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guided ships across the void, the soul flame of the Emperor made manifest. But standing before it, Loran felt no triumph, no reverence, only awe and terror. Because for the first time, he realized the truth the custodian had warned him of. The light did not merely illuminate, it devoured. The light burned brighter the longer Loran stared at it, until it seemed to press against the inside of his skull, searing through thought and memory alike. It was not a light meant for mortal eyes. It was language beyond words, vision beyond comprehension. Every flicker carried echoes of lives extinguished, prayers whispered into the void, the psychic screams of billions funneling upward through the Imperium. He realized, with dawning horror, that what he had mistaken for warmth was not grace, it was fuel. The Astronomicon burned with human souls. Each spark that flared within its radiance was a consciousness snuffed out, consumed to keep the beacon alive. He could see them, faintly, swirling in the golden current, faces twisted in devotion and agony, merging and dissolving in the Emperor's eternal flame. He wanted to look away, but the light would not release him. It reached deeper, peeling through the layers of his mind like pages in a book. His past unfolded before him, his childhood in the underhive, his mother's trembling hands as she offered ration slips to a priest, the moment he first heard the whisper that drew him toward the surface. Each image flared, then vanished into gold. The light was reading him, stripping him bare. Somewhere above, a voice began to chant, low at first, then rising in intensity. He recognized the words, though he did not know their meaning. They were the same syllables he'd heard in his dreams, the same ones that had guided him to this place. The sound reverberated through the sanctum, harmonizing with the hum of the Astronomicon, until the two became indistinguishable. Loran rose unsteadily to his feet, his vision blurred with tears and light. For a moment he thought he saw movement within the core, not the Emperor himself, but something vast and distant, like the shadow of divinity cast across a dying world. A hand of gold reaching, not outward, but inward, into the marrow of humanity. And beneath it, the faintest murmur, not a command, but a plea. "Help me." The words were gone as soon as they formed, swallowed by the roar of the light. He staggered backward, heart pounding. Could the Emperor, the undying master of mankind, enthroned in eternal glory, still feel pain? Could he still think, still speak, still remember? Or was this only the echo of his suffering, trapped forever within the machine that sustained him? As he struggled to comprehend, something changed in the air. The light flickered, just once, but enough to send a ripple through the chamber. Every machine, every conduit, every piece of sacred architecture responded as if the heartbeat of the world had skipped. The chanting ceased. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came the sound, a low resonant note, deep as the ocean and sharp as glass. The Astronomicon flared, flooding the sanctum with unbearable radiance. Loran fell to his knees, hands clutching his temples as visions poured into him. Visions of stars collapsing, of fleets adrift in the void, of psychers screaming as their minds burned out. And through it all, the light pulsed faster, hungrier, brighter. He understood now. The Astronomicon was not eternal. It was a wound, cauterized and bleeding light into the cosmos. The Emperor's will held it together, but only barely. Every flicker of brilliance was another ounce of his strength spent, another piece of his divinity burned to sustain a dying species. And Loran, the insignificant soul who had wandered from the depths of the hive, was seeing it all. He opened his mouth to pray, but the words refused to form. His voice was gone, stolen by the very air that shimmered with holiness. The light surged once more, and in that final moment he understood what the custodian had meant. The light did not reveal. It consumed, and it had found him worthy of consumption. The world vanished in gold. There was no pain when the light swallowed him, only silence, vast and endless, like the space between stars. He expected to feel himself unravel, to dissolve into the golden radiance, but instead there was form, thought, memory. He was adrift in something greater than himself, a tide that carried not water but will. It was not the warp, not yet, but it was close enough to taste its edges. He sensed minds around him, countless and screaming, woven into the current, like fibers in a single tapestry. Every one of them burned with devotion. Every one of them believed that suffering was holy, that death in service of the Emperor was the highest truth, and that belief, that agony, fed the flame. He saw them as constellations of memory, a sister of battle, face frozen in ecstasy as her armor melted beneath a daemon's blade, a guardsman dying nameless on some forgotten moon, whispering a prayer through blood, a tech priest who had replaced every piece of flesh except the one trembling hand that still reached toward the light. Billions more, all here, all fuel. The realization struck like a hammer. Terra's sanctity was not born of purity. It was built on sacrifice without end. The Emperor's throne did not shine because he was divine. It shone because humanity was burning beneath it. Somewhere beyond the radiance, a presence stirred. It was not the Emperor, not entirely. It was the echo of him, stretched thin across eternity, the last fragment of a god bound in machinery. It turned its gaze toward him, or perhaps it had never looked away. Loren felt his thoughts crack beneath its weight. There were no words, no sound, only intent. "Do you see now?" The question thundered through his being, not in accusation, but in sorrow. He tried to answer, but the moment he thought the words, the presence spoke again. Humanity endures because it must. But the cost, the light around him dimmed, just enough for shadow to exist again. Within it, he saw glimpses of the world beyond the sanctum, the endless city of Terra, the crawling pilgrims, the endless toil. He saw the faces of those who had never looked up, who lived and died beneath the surface without ever knowing why. Each one was a thread in the tapestry, a spark feeding the flame that now consumed him. And then came the vision, vast, cold, and horrifyingly beautiful. He saw the Imperium as it truly was, not a realm of glory, but a graveyard lit by faith. Its fleets sailed on the blood of martyrs, its cities built on the bones of the forgotten. Yet within that ruin burned something fierce and defiant, the human will to believe, to endure, even when the universe itself had turned to ash. The voice softened, fading like the dying note of a hymn. "You wanted to know what it means to live on Terra." The light flared one final time, and he felt himself falling, not downward, but inward, through memory and flesh, back toward the mortal shell he had left behind. His eyes opened to the dim glow of the sanctum. The custodian still stood where he had been, motionless as before, his armor gleaming faintly in the wan light. "You have seen," the custodian said quietly. Loren tried to speak, but his throat was raw. What was that?" The custodian's expression did not change. The truth, as much as mortal eyes can bear. You have glimpsed the Emperor's burden. Few are granted that mercy. Mercy? His voice broke. It felt like dying. The custodian inclined his head. Death and truth are brothers. You have met both. He turned, the golden cloak whispering against the stone. Leave this place. Tell no one what you saw. Let them believe as they must. Faith sustains the Imperium. Truth would end it. And just like that, the gate opened, and Lauren stepped once more into the twilight of Terra. The air tasted of dust and incense. The city stretched out before him, endless and unknowable. Yet somewhere within him, the light still burned, a faint ember, refusing to die. He looked up through the smog, toward the unseen stars beyond the haze, and whispered a prayer that was not for salvation, but understanding. Perhaps that was all that remained of humanity now. The will to keep walking, even when the path led only deeper into shadow. The storm had long since passed, but Terra did not know silence. The wind that moved through its ruins was a living thing, whispering through the broken arches and shattered domes, carrying the voices of the countless who prayed even now in the depths below. Lauren walked among them, though not as he once had. The memory of light still lingered in his mind, a wound that refused to close, a truth too vast for the human heart to contain. He had left the sanctum weeks ago, or perhaps years. Time on Terra was not measured by days, but by the tolling of cathedral bells, and even they had begun to lose rhythm. He wandered through the lower districts, where the sky was hidden by steel, and the air hung thick with oil and incense. Pilgrims moved past him in endless rivers, faces hollow with devotion, eyes turned upward toward a throne none would ever see. They carried relics, scraps of parchment, shards of glass, even rusted bolts, claiming each to be blessed. Some bled as they walked, others sang until their voices broke, and still they came. He had once been one of them. Now he watched them with a strange ache, part sorrow, part reverence. The custodian's words haunted him. Faith sustains the Imperium. Truth would end it. He wondered if this was what the Emperor had intended, a world of endless worship, where ignorance was mercy and devotion the only freedom left. Or perhaps, he thought, this too was the will of mankind, to keep believing, even when belief itself became a cage. He passed through the skeletal remains of a great bridge that spanned the chasm between hives. The stone beneath his boots was slick with soot, the railings carved with prayers. Through the haze he could see the faint glow of the upper spires, distant as stars, unreachable. Somewhere up there, the nobles of the administratum dined beneath stained glass and gold, their laughter lost to the hum of the city. Down here the world was made of iron and hunger. He reached a platform where pilgrims gathered before a towering statue of the Emperor, half buried in the walls of a collapsed chapel. Candles burned at its feet, rivers of wax hardening into pale rivers that crawled across the stone. A preacher stood atop the rubble, his voice amplified through a crackling vox grill. "Rejoice," the man cried, arms outstretched, "for every drop of your blood is counted. Every breath you surrender is praise. The Emperor sees, the Emperor sees, the Emperor loves." The crowd wept. Some tore at their robes, others beat their chests until they bled. The preacher's words echoed like thunder, and Lauren felt the weight of them settle in his chest. He had seen what they could not. He had heard the silence behind their hymns, and yet, watching them, he understood something terrible and profound. Their devotion was the Imperium. Without it, the whole vast machine would crumble. He stepped forward, his voice rising unbidden, cracked and raw but strong enough to carry. "The Emperor endures," he said, and the crowd turned, startled, their tears freezing into stillness. "Not because he demands it, but because you do. Your faith burns brighter than any star. Do not seek his voice. Be it." The preacher hesitated, uncertain whether to denounce or embrace the words. But the crowd began to chant, softly at first, then louder, until their voices rolled through the streets like a tide. Loren felt himself swallowed by it, his heart breaking open beneath the sound. He did not know if he spoke truth or blasphemy. Perhaps, in this world, they were the same. As the chant grew, the clouds above shifted. A break in the smog revealed a sliver of gold, sunlight piercing the haze for the first time in generations. The pilgrims fell to their knees, weeping. Loren stared upward, tears streaking through the dust on his face. Maybe it was only a trick of the light. Or maybe, for a heartbeat, the Emperor truly had looked upon his world. The chant became a hymn. The hymn became a roar. And within that sound, the mingling of despair and devotion, Terra itself seemed to breathe. When it was over, Loren was gone. Some said he had been taken by the custodians, reclaimed for the sanctum. Others swore he had ascended, drawn into the Emperor's light as a living saint. Most simply forgot him, as they did all things, but the words he spoke spread through the underhives like wildfire. A new prayer whispered in the darkness. "The Emperor endures because we do." It was heresy, perhaps, or the beginning of something holy. Far above, within the depths of the golden throne, unseen and unmoving, the Emperor's hollow eyes stared across eternity. No one could say if he heard the prayer. No one could say if he cared, but somewhere deep within the machinery, a single spark flickered, faint, almost imperceptible, like the echo of a dying star refusing to fade. And on the world below, beneath towers of faith and oceans of stone, humanity kept walking, kept working, kept believing. For on Terra there was no end, only endurance, only the will to burn. The light faded, the chanting fell to whispers, then silence. Across the poisoned plains and towering cathedrals of Terra, the echoes of faith drifted like embers in the dark. Somewhere, a bell tolled, slow, hollow, eternal, and the sound folded into the heartbeat of the planet itself. In the end, nothing on Terra ever truly ends. The ashes of one prayer become the fuel of another. The dust of the forgotten feeds the hope of the living. And the golden throne burns still, not with mercy, nor with malice, but with the stubborn fire of mankind's refusal to die. Perhaps that is the Emperor's truest miracle. Not the light of the Astronomicon, not the legions or the faith or the endless war, but this, the quiet persistence of billions who will never see his face, yet keep believing that he watches all the same. So remember this. When you think of Holy Terra, it is not only the heart of the Imperium, it is its scar, its proof that humanity endures, not because of its gods, but despite them. And as long as even one voice dares to whisper in the dark, as long as one soul keeps walking through the storm, the fire will never go out. This is Earth. This is the throne. This is what it truly means to live in the age of the Emperor.